Hello and welcome to Rose Talks, a podcast brought to you by The Rose Company and hosted by Jose Canseco. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Rose Talks. This is your host, Jose Canseco, and I am really excited to be presenting this episode because we're going to be talking about a very up-to-date topic, representation and directing. And here with us is the mega talented Ula Moroz. How are you, Ula?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I recently just moved to a different house and it's a mess. My room is a mess. So why don't we start by you telling us a little bit more about what you do, what you're doing right now?
Cool. So most recently, because I'm stuck in the house, as we all are, I've been working on a film that was filmed in my house. So I do both theatre and film. That's what I've always been interested in, to balance between those two art forms. And that's what I've been working on recently. I've been also working on a project that might happen next year. I'm writing a play for it, and we're planning with my two friends, also directors, to grab some actors and go to Spain and rehearse there for 3 months because we don't want to be constricted by time. So that's the plan for now. And otherwise just working on my dissertation. So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
That sounds really exciting, honestly. And yeah, you did mention it before to me. You were planning on going to Spain and do some community theater there. And that's really, I'm really looking forward to see how that turns out.
Yeah, me too.
Really nice. So I'm just going to continue. So we made a plan for this interview. I know that you were part of the Young Vic Directors Program. And on my last interview, I actually interviewed Darren. He's also part of that program. And he talked a little bit about his experience in there. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about what you've done, how you got in.
Well, the Young Vic Directors Program is pretty open to anyone. You need to have to write an application, but they're welcoming everyone who's interested in directing, basically. And it's funny you ask that because I did a workshop with them today, about creating sensory language within your production, and how to unpick your production for taste or smell or visuals, which was wonderful. So that's how I was been involved with them through doing workshops and stuff. And hopefully at some point I will be able to apply for their schemes, Genesis director, but I still need to do some work beforehand. So they've been a wonderful community to connect with, especially during lockdown. It's something to look forward to when you're just sitting by yourself. So I absolutely recommend it to all the directors who are interested in developing their craft.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, that's actually good advice. I really recommend this program. It's very complete. So just go ahead whenever the Young Vic opens. No, that's not true. You can still apply even now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm sure you can still apply now.
Perfect. So there you go. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about is your experience at the Bunker Theatre. So as we know, the Bunker Theatre is no more. Sad times. But you were one of the directors who had the honor to present a piece before it closed down. Can you tell us a bit more about what that piece was and what it meant for you?
Yeah. So we're so unlucky because I was just rehearsing the play, which was called Nascendo, which is a Romanian play. And they closed the theater like 5 days beforehand, before the show was supposed to be on. So we never actually managed to do this week of Power Share, because that's how it was called. And I was part of the Eastern European Power Share, and Anastasia Sommers was like hosting it. And because we know each other, because we were both Polish, she just like texted me and she was like, would you like to work on something during that night? And obviously I said yes, because it also creates representation of Eastern Europeans that might not be so common here in Britain. So that was something that I was really interested in doing. So we did all the rehearsals, or most of the rehearsals for it, and then we had to like say goodbye to the project. But I do need to say, they have still paid all the creatives. And that's something that I found so admirable, especially right now when we can see more and more theatres closing. Today we found out about Theatre Royal Plymouth, which is heartbreaking. So I really appreciated that gesture, even if it was just like a little bit, because we've all been like quite struggling during those times.
Oh no, well that's sad. Well, I mean, still good news.
Yes.
It must have been really difficult for the theatre, because I mean it was basically its last weeks, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I think it might have been really difficult for Chris, the artistic director, but it's just their like manifesto and the kind of work they were creating. That was like a few weeks before that, I went to see this play, I don't remember the title, about a Black queer girl and her like experience at uni, and it was absolutely wonderful. And there was so many Black audiences, and then you could feel the sense of community. And like, fine, I was like one of the few white people there, but like just to see that atmosphere, I think the Bunker was like a very special place, and unlike certain venues that maybe do not give that sense of community to minorities or migrants and so on. So it's like a really big shame that they had to close.
Oh, well, at least they paid for all the creatives that were part of this program. So that's good. And most importantly, I think that they gave, throughout all these years, they've given their stage to minorities and underrepresented voices, which I think it is really important these days, because even though, and this is something that I was reading before, even though there's, minorities, people of color in the theater, there's still not many stories telling their lives, experiences, and all of that. So that's something that the Bunker specialized in, and it's such a shame that they have to close down. But let's transition from there and like talk about representation this time. So why do you choose to research about this?
So there are like two reasons. One of them is because since I was like, I don't know, 15 or so on, I watched a lot of international cinema, from like South African to Brazilian to Russian. And I have noticed that I don't see much of that on stage. That the voices are just not, I mean, cinema like probably is getting better at that as well, because it's very clear that there's a lot of white Western voices in cinema too. But that was something that like inspired me to look into that. And then the second reason is more personal. So when I moved here, I realized that my nationality is often represented as uneducated, like working class, alcoholics that constantly drink vodka, yeah, so I'm just playing to a stereotype now, but those kind of stereotypes are incredibly harmful to individuals, or the idea that the immigrants are stealing the jobs, and all of that. So it has a direct impact on us. So that was something that I've always been interested in, because all those stereotypes do not define me. I'm definitely not working class. My father is a music conductor, so pretty sure I'm not belonging to that. But within the media and like newspapers, like The Sun, I'm just that one thing, that one category. So that was something that propelled me, let's say, to research this further, and what I can do as a director to help spread the diversity of voices and give agency to those cultures and those ethnicities or minorities that haven't had that voice for a very long time, because of colonialism and so on. So yeah, that's the reason why.
On the abstract that you sent me a few days back, you talked about the different stages of decision making that a director has to go through. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So there's one thing that I want to mention. So there's one question within, should I be the person to do this? And there's another question is that, okay, I'm already directing this play. What do I need to consider in order to give agency and voice to the culture that I'm representing? So I'm going to talk about the second scenario, because that's what I've been working on. So the first thing that directors should consider, or I'm considering as a director, I'll make it more personal, is, I'll give an example because that might be easier. So I've been working on a South African play within the past few months. The play is about a Cape Malay community within that lives in Cape Town in an area called Bukab. And within that, like, what I've discovered with that play is, like, when I approached it, I didn't know much about South Africa. Maybe I knew a little bit about their history, and maybe I watched some films, but it wasn't much. So the question was, how can I direct this if I haven't had a lived experience of that culture? So at a very early on, I was pretty clear that I want to have as many South African and Cape Malay artists on my team to influence the way I will direct this show. And so almost instead of becoming this like traditional maestro of the rehearsal room, I will become the facilitator. So for instance, if I had an idea and that idea had nothing to do with the culture, or would like just seem wrong because that's not something that people would do, then I would have to withdraw that idea, because one of the writers who is Cape Malay could come into the room from time to time and be like, "Well, what are you doing? This is completely wrong." So there's this constant feeling of like checking yourself and your assumptions, and that maybe you have had from like popular media or whatever, that you just need to like constantly think about, but also listen to the people who are representative of that culture. So that's one thing. And something that I've heard from Nastasia Sommers, because I did like an interview with her, and she did a play duel about this half Iranian, half British character. And I totally agree with her. Like, in technology, you will never know everything, so you can do as many research, which is obviously the best way to go about it. You can do as much research as you want, but you won't know everything about that culture because you just simply haven't lived there or have never experienced it. So there's a sense of respect that you need to have for the creators who are representative of that culture, and just do whatever, give them the agency to tell their story, because it's not your story. If it was a story about Polish people, then that might be a bit different. But it's because it's about ethnic minority within Cape Town. I don't have that experience, so the voice needs to be given to someone else. So I think that's like most of it. And then from that kind of angle, you start thinking about how you approach casting, how you approach working with writers, and how do you approach rehearsal room or design. Like, for instance, I was working in design with a Canadian designer. We haven't known much about that culture either before he started working on the project. So together we were working on it, and we came up with some ideas, but those ideas would always be run by Amira, who is Cape Malay. So if she would say, yeah, that feels like representative of my culture, then that's okay. If she was like, no, this is not right, then we would have to go back to our ideas and keep working on it.
Yeah, I think this is really good. And also, you mentioned a little bit about what you do as a director whenever you're working with other minorities, and you want it to be fully represented of their culture. So I think that's really good advice for our listeners as well.
Also, like, another thing is, although it's set in South Africa, this play is about gentrification, and let's be honest, this is happening here as well, and it's also targeting the Black communities the most. The coloured in Hackney, in Peckham, those are areas that are mainly lived not by white people. There is a reason for it. So there's this weird parallel that is happening here that is also connected to where we live right now, and how money are distributed through property and so on. So I would hope that once this play comes into fruition, the target audience would be ethnic minorities, so they could find themselves in those spaces.
Yeah, and I mean, we create these shows. We help create them in a team to present it to these people, right?
Yeah.
So, and as I was saying at the beginning, I know that I might be repeating myself, but it is important that there is representation on stage. Because that's how we strive for equality, for understanding, for acceptance, tolerance, and an open-minded society, which is what we need right now. And we're gonna have a look at the concepts that we have here. So, for instance, diversity. How would you describe diversity?
I'll give an example. So what's been happening throughout history is that a lot of stories were white, and white is considered as neutral. And a lot of stories here on British stages are also white and about British people. But that doesn't represent the diversity of social structure of who is living actually, for instance, in London. So those people who are not white or not British very often don't see themselves on stage or in film, or they're misrepresented by, for instance, this is a cliche, but Africa is very, often, African countries are often represented as poor. But that's not all Africa is. There is so much diversity of experience over there. So that's something we need to keep looking at. But also, that's what's important, so we can find ourselves on the stages, we can identify with it, rather than just like, it's absolutely horrendous when a Black person can only identify themselves with like a white person on stage because they're never represented. The Black stories are not. I mean, it's getting better now. I'm hoping it's not as good as it should be. And those stories are becoming part of our identity as well. So, for instance, if I only saw stories about Polish people that are, let's say, criminals, that I'm more likely to become one as well, because that's all we're playing into. So those diverse stories about different kind of people, of different cultures, different ethnicities, are incredibly important, because they are also becoming part of who we are as human beings. Yeah, and define our lives in a way.
Mm-hmm. A couple of years back, I went to a theater to see a Shakespeare production of Much Ado About Nothing. I mean, the setting was during the Mexican Revolution, but and then when the actors came out, the costumes did represent very slightly, perhaps Mexican folklore, but maybe not so much those times during the Mexican Revolution. And then I was really shocked to see that none of the actors were actually Mexican descent or even Latin American. So that was a bit disappointing. I did notice a few actors were Spanish, so perhaps, but that was a little bit of like, oh, well, it's kind of similar. But it's still not similar. It's still not the same. And then I started thinking, but this play is British. It was written by Shakespeare, and it was originally intended for white actors, right? So they've adapted this by.
Well, but if you do set it in a Mexican context, then you need to honor the fact that there should be Mexican, or at least, as you said, South American actors on stage. There's something incredibly wrong with casting also Spanish actors to do it, because Spanish people invaded South America, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something like not right there.
Yeah, it was pretty confusing. So yeah, that was actually one of the moments when I started to realize that there was a lack of representation here in London. And but like let's hear it from you. And I think you've talked a little bit about when you came to London and you would see Polish characters, you would only see stereotypes, which is kind of the same way I'm talking here. When I saw that play, I saw stereotypes, and I didn't see much of the true culture of Mexico in there.
Yes. So I was thinking about this question, and like one show that comes to mind, and it actually wasn't a British show, it was an Australian one that came into National Theatre. And it's not only about misrepresentation, but it's about who is telling the story. So the show was about white criminals that were imported to Australia, and then they took over, and about the colonization of Aboriginal land and so on. So this troupe came over here to show that story, but the story was still told from the white perspective. And what was mind-boggling for me was that they brought Aboriginal actors with them. And instead of telling the story from their perspective, because that would be so fascinating, that's what I want to see on stage. Because I've never seen an Aboriginal troupe telling their stories about their like dreamings, which is like a myth, and about their culture. And to see that story from that angle, that would be fascinating, rather than, again, I'm sorry, seeing a story from the white perspective. It's just time to decolonize the way we're thinking about storytelling, but also about the way we create theatre. And try to put forward those stories that haven't been told so far, or they haven't been told here in London as much as they should. So yeah, I'm probably digressed a bit, but
no, I think it's fine. I think coming back again to what I was saying, I think that's the answer. I mean, we just need to give the chance to these people to be on stage and to present their own lives and their own stories, right? Because sometimes, like, I've seen so many shows, even films, they make the mistake of, oh, let's have this story, but let's tell it from, this like person's perspective.
Also, it's really interesting what you've mentioned about that Shakespeare and how they portrayed Mexico. I think directors and theatre makers also need to be aware of how they, for instance, portray like cultures for like costume. So just because I'm portraying Mexican people doesn't mean they are all wearing sombreros day to day. You know what I mean? I'm going into a stereotype again, but like it's absolutely ridiculous that, like, for instance, you would portray a Polish person only wearing her Sunday church clothes, because that's not what you wear on day-to-day basis.
The other day, I was also reading about, I was researching about representation and about colorblind casting and tokenism, which are rather new concepts and very difficult to define, actually. But I mean, I don't know if you have anything to say about those concepts.
Tokenism and colorblind casting. So very often what happens is, so let's say when you have Othello and you just decide to just go for anyone, whether it's white or black or whatever, and there's something incredibly wrong about giving white people roles for actual with black characters, for instance. There's a difference if you have a black person playing Hamlet, for instance, because they haven't had in the past those opportunities, or not as much as white people. Most of the characters within our stage are white, at least in Western playwriting. So there is a difference within that. And there's also this argument that with colorblind casting, very often you just cast like anyone from any ethnicity for a character that in the original, let's say, is white, but you're still showing it in the frameworks of that whiteness. So it's almost like their color is like unimportant. There's no context to it. So yeah, that's something that is incredibly complex. It can be done really wrongly if the context is not right.
Yeah. I actually got a definition of what tokenism is, just in case anyone here who's listening is wondering. It's, as I said, it's really difficult to find a very precise definition of what tokenism is. This scholar, Different, in his book Beyond Tokenism and Tricksterism, he defines tokenism as using members of ethnic and racial minorities in a perfunctory way or as a symbolic gesture of inclusivity, lending a multicultural veneer to the predominantly white program, which is, I think, what you were saying, really. I also came across this quote right here, an extract from Power and Problems of Performance Across Ethnic Lines by William H. Sun. This quote was pretty much saying that from a purely educational point of view, there are greater needs for whites to experience other cultures by playing non-white roles than for people of color to experience the dominant culture by playing white, since the society is still overwhelmingly influenced by white culture and still lacks an understanding of non-Western cultures. So, what do you think about that quote?
So I think there are some issues within that. So when you have white person, I said, playing a predominantly black character, maybe for that individual, it's a good thing because they will understand something more about, for instance, the idea of being oppressed. But to put that on stage politically, it doesn't feel right. It's kind of what I've already said about Othello and so on, because historically, everyone like black actors or ethnic minority actors have been oppressed to do only like a sidekick characters or something that was very stereotypical, or characters that are quite stereotypical and on sidelines. So it just doesn't feel right for me to portray that on stage. Although maybe on the individual level, for that one individual will be a good thing. However, I do agree that white people need to experience a little bit like Three Sisters, recently the production of The National, directed by Nadia Fall, to put the Nigerian 1960s environment within Three Sisters is fairly smart thing to do, because white people will come in because Three Sisters and because of Chekhov, because like their story, but actually it's framed in such a way that it's actually a Nigerian story and it's written by a Nigerian writer. So they're almost like, I don't know, maybe not, maybe they're smart enough, but like tricked into seeing those stories because they are within the framework, or at least the title of Chekhov's play. So those kind of stories or adaptations are incredibly important because white audiences need to educate themselves. What have been happening recently with Black Lives Matter and so on, we white people need to keep re-educating ourselves, because to us, our privilege is invisible and we need to start and educate ourselves about it and how it affects others. Because that's how we were brought up in. We were brought up in a system that is favoring this kind of approach. So we need to keep working on it and almost undo it, all that education that we've been like wired into. And stories are a way of doing that.
Wow, no, I think that's great. But I'm gonna continue. So I want you to give directors who are listening right now some advice about how they can approach representation with the work that they do on theatre.
So it's kind of what I said already, is definitely research as much as you can about that culture, but also remember that I'm going to say that this is Nastasia Sommer's advice that she gave to me that now I'm passing on to listeners or whoever. Just acknowledge the fact that you're not going to know everything about that culture if you haven't already experienced it or lived there, and so on. But also be respectful enough to listen to those who are from that culture and invite those people into your room, into your rehearsals. Try to cast as many of those actors who are of that culture or are in close proximity to that culture, rather than just try and take over the rehearsal room and be the director, or whatever that idea of the maestro is, because that's what it's quite interesting that that's almost resembling the power structure that we've been in. It's always that like white man in inverted commas that is ruling the rehearsal room, and that's what's happening in the world. So it's time to break the structures and have a dialogue and just collaborate. That's what's most important, I would say.
Really great advice you gave us there. I think we always forget that theatre is about collaborations and it's about working in teams. Everyone chips in a little bit in order to create this masterpiece. And so we just need to remember that. But we are running out of time, unfortunately. I think this representation topic we could go on and on about this. There is definitely so much more that we could cover with this. What do you tell our audiences where they can find you on social media so that they can keep up with your newest short film that you're going to be releasing very soon?
Well, you can find me on Instagram or Twitter. I think it's Ula Moroz. So very easy to remember. And yeah, just we might send the film first to some film competitions and festivals, and then it will be available probably on YouTube. So yeah, thank you.
Really excited for that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you very much, Ula, for being here. It was an honor to have you here, as always. And yeah, you listen to Rose Talks, presented by the Rose Company and hosted by me, Jose Canseco. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you really liked our content, then make sure that you rate and subscribe. You can find us on social media at RoseComp Theatre on Instagram and Facebook. And also make sure that you check out our website, theroseproductions.com. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.